The crimson dawn of Sol crested the jagged horizon of Mars Colony 6, casting long shadows across the prefabricated domes and atmospheric processors that comprise humanity's most remote outpost. Commander Elena Riker stood at the observation deck of the command center, her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of synthetic coffee, watching the daily ritual of another Martian sunrise. At 42, Riker had spent the better part of 2 decades on Mars, watching the red planet slowly transform from a barren wasteland into something resembling a second home for humanity. Her steel-gray eyes had witnessed the construction of the first permanent settlements, the successful terraforming experiments, and the gradual expansion of human presence across the Martian surface. She was a pioneer in every sense of the word, and Mars Colony 6 was her domain. "Commander," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Lieutenant Marcus Chun, her communications officer, approaching with a tablet in hand and an expression of barely contained excitement. "We've got something you need to see." Riker set down her coffee and accepted the tablet, her eyes scanning the morning surveillance reports. For the past 3 years, Colony 6 had maintained a network of automated reconnaissance drones that patrolled a 50-kilometer radius around the settlement, monitoring for dust storms, equipment failures, and the occasional wildlife that had somehow managed to adapt to Mars's harsh environment. Sector 7 Alpha, Chen continued, pointing to a specific grid reference on the digital map. The morning patrol detected an anomalous structure approximately 37 kilometers northwest of our position. Riker studied the satellite imagery on the screen. Where yesterday there had been nothing but the familiar red-brown terrain of the Martian plains, now stood a perfect black monolith, roughly 12 meters in height and 3 meters wide. Its surfaces appeared to be completely smooth, reflecting no light despite the early morning sun. "When did this appear?" Riker asked, her voice maintaining its characteristic calm despite the strangeness of the situation. "That's the thing, Commander. Our last sweep of that sector was at 2,300 hours yesterday. The area was completely clear. The first indication we had of anything unusual was when Drone Charlie 7 lost contact at approximately 0630 this morning." Riker's eyebrows rose slightly. In her experience, equipment failures on Mars were usually preceded by warning signs: dust accumulation, power fluctuations, or mechanical wear. Complete communication blackouts were rare and typically indicated something more serious than routine maintenance issues. "Have we attempted to re-establish contact with the drone?" "Negative response on all frequencies," Chen replied. "But here's where it gets interesting. We sent drone Delta 3 to investigate Charlie 7's last known position. The video feed shows the monolith, and Charlie 7 is sitting motionless approximately 10 meters from its base, apparently undamaged, but completely unresponsive." Riker studied the image more carefully. The monolith appeared to be made of some kind of dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its edges were perfectly straight, its angles precisely 90 degrees. It looked artificial, deliberately placed, and entirely alien to the Martian landscape. "Any theories on composition or origin?" she asked. Dr. Voss ran a preliminary spectral analysis using Delta 3 sensors, Chen said, referring to the colony's chief scientist. "The material doesn't match anything in our databases. It's not registering on thermal imaging. Electromagnetic sensors show some kind of interference pattern, and the gravitometric readings are unusual." "Unusual how?" "The monolith appears to have a gravitational signature that's roughly 3 times denser than it should be based on its apparent size. Either it's made of some incredibly dense material we've never encountered, or there's something else going on." Riker handed the tablet back to Chun and walked to the communications console. "Give me Dr. Voss, Dr. Patel, and Sergeant Morrison. Full briefing in conference room A in 20 minutes. And prep the rover for a potential expedition." "Yes, ma'am." "Should I notify Earth Command?" Riker paused, considering the implications. Any communication with Earth involved a significant time delay, currently 18 minutes each way due to the orbital positions of the 2 planets. By the time they received instructions from Earth Command, whatever was happening with the monolith could have escalated significantly. "Negative. We'll handle initial reconnaissance ourselves and report our findings once we have more substantial data." Mars Colony 6 is authorized for independent operational decisions, and I intend to exercise that authority. 20 minutes later, Riker sat at the head of the oval table in conference room A, studying the faces of her senior staff. Dr. Sarah Voss, the colony's xenogeologist and chief scientist, was a brilliant woman in her late 30s whose enthusiasm for discovery was matched only by her methodical approach to research. Dr. Rajesh Patel served as the medical officer and biologist, his expertise crucial for any potential first contact scenarios. Sergeant Jack Morrison, the colony's security chief and Riker's most trusted field operative, brought military precision and tactical awareness to any potentially dangerous situation. Let me be clear about our situation, Riker began, activating the holographic display system that projected a three-dimensional map of the surrounding terrain. We have an unidentified structure of unknown origin that appeared overnight in our surveillance zone. Our initial drone reconnaissance has been compromised, and we have no reliable data about the object's purpose, composition, or potential hazards. Dr. Voss leaned forward, her eyes bright with scientific curiosity. Commander, based on the limited sensor data we've collected, I believe we're looking at something genuinely unprecedented. The material composition doesn't match any known terrestrial or Martian minerals. The gravitational anomalies suggest either exotic matter or some kind of dimensional manipulation. Dimensional manipulation? Morrison's voice carried a note of skepticism. Doctor, with all due respect, that sounds like science fiction. Sergeant, 6 months ago, faster-than-light communication was science fiction. 3 years ago, successful terraforming was science fiction. We're living in an age where the impossible becomes routine. Dr. Voss pulled up additional data on the holographic display. The electromagnetic interference patterns we're detecting are consistent with theoretical models of space-time distortion. I'm not saying that's what we're dealing with, but we can't rule it out. Dr. Patel spoke up, his voice thoughtful. From a biological standpoint, we need to consider the possibility that this object represents some form of life or intelligence that we haven't encountered before. The precision of its construction and the timing of its appearance suggest deliberate action rather than natural phenomenon. Riker nodded, appreciating the diverse perspectives of her team. Operational parameters are as follows. We conduct a manned reconnaissance mission to investigate the monolith directly. Dr. Voss, you'll lead the scientific analysis. Dr. Patel, you'll monitor for any biological or medical hazards. Sergeant Morrison, you're responsible for security and tactical assessment. I'll command the mission. Commander, Morrison interjected, I strongly recommend we send additional drones first, if we've already lost one. The drones haven't given us the information we need, Riker replied firmly. Sometimes, human judgment and adaptability are irreplaceable. We go unprepared, we stay alert, and we maintain constant communication with base. But we go. Dr. Voss was already pulling up technical specifications on her personal tablet. I'll need portable sensor equipment, sample collection tools, and emergency communication gear. If this object is generating the kind of interference we suspect, our standard comm systems might not be reliable. How long do you need to prep? Riker asked. 2 hours for equipment check and loading. I want to bring backup systems for everything. Make it happen. We leave at 1,100 hours. As the meeting dispersed, Riker remained in the conference room, staring at the holographic representation of the monolith. In her 20 years on Mars, she had encountered sandstorms that could strip paint from metal, equipment failures that had nearly cost lives, and the constant psychological pressure of living millions of kilometers from Earth. But she had never encountered anything that felt quite this ominous. The monolith stood in the hologram like a dark sentinel, its presence somehow commanding attention despite its simplicity. There was something about its perfect geometry, its apparent immunity to the harsh Martian environment, that suggested capabilities far beyond human understanding. Riker's intuition, honed by decades of survival in hostile environments, was telling her that the monolith represented either the greatest discovery in human history or the greatest threat Mars Colony 6 had ever faced. Possibly both. The Martian landscape stretched endlessly in all directions as the six-wheeled rover traversed the rocky terrain towards Sector 7 Alpha. Riker sat in the driver's seat, her hands steady on the manual controls despite the vehicle's sophisticated autopilot system. In her experience, human reflexes were often faster than computer systems when dealing with unexpected obstacles. Behind her, Dr. Voss monitored a bank of scientific instruments, their displays casting multicolored light across her concentrated features. Dr. Patel sat opposite her, occasionally checking his medical scanner for any signs of biological activity in the surrounding area. Sergeant Morrison occupied the rear position, his eyes constantly sweeping the horizon for potential threats while maintaining radio contact with Colony 6. ETA 15 minutes, Riker announced, her voice cutting through the low hum of the rover's electric motors. How are we looking on sensor data, Dr. Voss? The electromagnetic interference is becoming more pronounced as we approach, Voss replied, tapping several controls on her console. I'm registering fluctuations in the local magnetic field that definitely aren't natural. Whatever that thing is, it's actively affecting its environment. Through the rover's reinforced windows, they could see the monolith growing larger on the horizon. Even from a distance of several kilometers, its presence seemed to dominate the landscape. It stood perfectly vertical, its black surface creating a stark contrast against the reddish-brown Martian soil. Commander, Morrison's voice carried a note of concern. I'm having trouble maintaining clear communication with base. The signal keeps cutting in and out. Riker frowned. Their communication equipment was designed to maintain contact over much longer distances, even in adverse conditions. Switch to backup frequencies and boost the signal strength. I want continuous contact with Colony 6. Already tried, ma'am. Same result. It's like something is actively jamming our transmissions. Dr. Patel looked up from his scanner. I'm not detecting any biological signatures, but there's something odd about the atmospheric readings in the target area. The chemical composition appears to be fluctuating in ways that shouldn't be possible. Fluctuating how? Riker asked. Oxygen levels, nitrogen concentration, even trace elements are shifting in what appears to be a rhythmic pattern. It's almost like the atmosphere is breathing. Riker brought the rover to a stop approximately 1 kilometer from the monolith and activated the external camera system for a closer look. On the main display screen, they could see the structure in detail for the first time. It was even more impressive and unsettling than the satellite images had suggested. The monolith's surface appeared to be made of a material that was somehow darker than black, as if it absorbed not just visible light, but other forms of electromagnetic radiation as well. Its edges were so perfectly straight that they seemed to cut through reality itself, creating an optical illusion that made it difficult to judge the object's exact distance. More disturbing was the area immediately surrounding the monolith. The ground appeared to be different, not just in color, but in texture and even apparent density. It was as if reality itself was somehow altered within a 50-meter radius of the structure. Dr. Voss, Riker said quietly, tell me what you're seeing. Voss adjusted her instruments and ran a series of scans. Commander, this is unprecedented. The gravitational field in that area is definitely distorted. I'm reading spatial displacement that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics. And there, she pointed to a section of the display. Charlie 7. The disabled drone sat motionless near the base of the monolith, exactly where the satellite images had shown it. But something was wrong with its appearance. The drone seemed somehow less substantial, as if it were a photograph of itself rather than the actual physical object. Can we attempt remote reactivation? Morrison asked. Worth a try, Voss replied, activating her communication array. She sent a series of standard restart commands to the drone, but received no response. It's not responding to any signals, but its physical condition appears intact. Riker made a decision. We're going in. Full environmental suits, maximum sensor recording, and we stay together. No one approaches the monolith alone under any circumstances. 20 minutes later, the 4 explorers stood at the edge of what Dr. Voss had begun calling the distortion field, the 50-meter radius around the monolith where normal physics appeared to be suspended. Their environmental suits were functioning normally, but the sensor readings were becoming increasingly erratic. Commander, Voss said, her voice slightly distorted by the suit's communication system, I'm recommending we proceed with extreme caution. The spatial distortion appears to be intensifying. Riker studied the monolith, now looming above them like a black tower against the Martian sky. Up close, its surface seemed to ripple occasionally, as if it were made of liquid rather than solid matter. But when she looked directly at these ripples, they seemed to disappear, leaving only the perfectly smooth black surface. "What's our communication status with base?" she asked Morrison. "Intermittent at best. I'm getting maybe 1 word in 10 through the interference." Dr. Patel's voice crackled through the comm system. "I'm detecting significant changes in local atmospheric pressure. It's almost like there's a localized weather system centered on the monolith." As they approached the perimeter of the distortion field, Riker noticed that her footsteps seemed to echo strangely, as if the sound were being reflected from surfaces that didn't exist. The ground beneath their feet appeared solid, but somehow felt different, more responsive, as if it were aware of their presence. "Hold position," Riker commanded when they reached the edge of the distortion field. "Dr. Voss, can you run a full sensor sweep before we proceed?" Voss activated her portable scientific array and began collecting data. "Commander, the readings are off the charts. I'm detecting temporal fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, and what appears to be dimensional instability. Based on these measurements, I would strongly advise." Her words were cut off as the monolith suddenly began to emit a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through their bones rather than their ears. The black surface started to ripple more visibly, and the distortion field around its base began to expand. "Fall back," Riker ordered, but as they turned to retreat, they discovered that the landscape behind them had changed. Where their rover had been parked just minutes before, there was now only empty Martian terrain stretching to the horizon. "Where's the rover?" Morrison demanded, his voice tight with concern. Dr. Patel checked his positioning system. "According to GPS, we're still in the same location, but the rover isn't here," Riker finished. She activated her emergency beacon, but the device showed no signal strength. "We're completely cut off." The tone from the monolith was growing louder and more complex, developing harmonics that created an almost musical quality. Dr. Voss was frantically trying to record the acoustic patterns while simultaneously monitoring her instruments for any sign of imminent danger. "Commander," she called out urgently, "the dimensional instability is reaching critical levels. I think the monolith is preparing to." The world around them suddenly flashed with brilliant white light, and Elena Riker felt the sensation of falling through space and time simultaneously. Her last coherent thought before consciousness fled was that they had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. Commander Riker's consciousness returned gradually, like emerging from deep water into sunlight. Her first sensation was of cold, a penetrating chill that seemed to seep through her environmental suit despite its thermal regulation systems. Her second sensation was that something was fundamentally wrong with the world around her. She opened her eyes to find herself lying on red Martian soil under a familiar crimson sky, but the quality of light was subtly different. The sun seemed dimmer, and the shadows cast by the rocks and ridges around her had an unusual depth that suggested layers of reality she couldn't quite comprehend. "Commander," Dr. Voss's voice crackled through the comm system, tinged with confusion and concern. "Are you conscious?" Riker pushed herself to a sitting position and looked around. Her team was scattered within a 20-meter radius, all apparently unconscious until recently. Dr. Patel was struggling to his feet, checking his medical scanner with trembling hands. Sergeant Morrison was already upright, his weapon drawn as he scanned the horizon for threats. "Status report," Riker commanded, her training taking over despite the disorientation. "All team members present and accounted for," Morrison replied. "No immediate threats visible, but Commander, something's not right about this place." Riker stood and activated her suit's navigation system, but the GPS readings made no sense. According to the device, they were still in Sector 7 Alpha of Mars Colony SXS territory, but when she looked toward where the colony should be visible on the horizon, she saw only empty landscape. "Dr. Voss, sensor readings?" Voss was already working with her portable instruments, her face pale behind her helmet's visor. "Commander, the atmospheric composition is identical to Mars, but the electromagnetic spectrum is completely different. It's as if we're on Mars, but not our Mars." "Explain." The magnetic field orientation is reversed. The radio frequencies that should be carrying signals from our satellites are empty. And the cosmic background radiation has a pattern I've never seen before. Voss paused, checking her readings again. Commander, I believe we've been transported to another dimension, a parallel version of Mars. Dr. Patel's voice interrupted their conversation. Commander, you need to see this. They turned to find him standing next to what appeared to be the monolith. But this version was different. Instead of the light-absorbing black surface they had encountered, this monolith was mirror-bright, reflecting their images with perfect clarity. More unsettling, their reflections seemed to move independently, turning to watch them even when they stood still. The monolith followed us, Morrison observed, his weapon still at ready position. Or we followed it, Riker corrected. Dr. Voss, any theories on what just happened? Based on the dimensional instability readings I recorded before the transportation event, I believe the monolith functions as some kind of portal or gateway between parallel realities. We were exposed to its effect field and transported to this alternate version of Mars. Riker studied their reflections in the monolith's surface. Something about the way their mirror selves moved was deeply unsettling. It was as if they were looking at people who shared their faces but not their intentions. Can the monolith transport us back? She asked. Unknown. I would need time to study its properties and understand the activation mechanism. Then that's our priority. We find a way home. Riker activated her comm system and attempted to contact Colony 6, but received only static. Dr. Patel, what's our environmental situation? Atmosphere is breathable, but I'm detecting some trace compounds that don't exist on our Mars. Radiation levels are slightly higher, but within acceptable parameters for short-term exposure. Food and water supplies will last approximately 72 hours. Morrison lowered his weapon, but kept it ready. Commander, I recommend we establish a defensive perimeter and... His words were interrupted by a sound that chilled them all to the bone. The distant rumble of a rover engine. They turned toward the source of the noise and saw a vehicle approaching from the direction where Colony 6 should have been located. As it drew closer, they could see that it was identical to their own rover, but the figures visible through its windows were themselves. That's impossible, Dr. Patel whispered. Through the rover's windshield, they could see Commander Riker in the driver's seat, her face bearing an expression of cold determination that the real Riker had never worn. Beside her sat Dr. Voss, but this version's eyes held a calculating intelligence that seemed predatory rather than scientific. Dr. Patel and Sergeant Morrison were also visible, but their postures and expressions suggested people who had been stripped of compassion and moral restraint. Those aren't us, Morrison said grimly. They're wearing our faces, but those aren't us. The approaching rover stopped approximately 50 meters away, and the four figures emerged. They moved with the same physical mannerisms as the real team, but their body language conveyed menace and hostile intent. The mirror Riker stepped forward, a smile playing across her lips that never reached her eyes. Well, the other Riker called out, her voice carrying across the Martian landscape with perfect clarity. The originals have finally arrived. We've been waiting for you. Who are you? Riker demanded, though she suspected she already knew the answer. We're you, the mirror Riker replied. The better versions. The versions that understand what real power means and aren't constrained by your pathetic moral limitations. She gestured toward the monolith. This device has been calling to us for months, showing us glimpses of other realities, other possibilities. When it finally activated, it brought us exactly what we needed. Replacements for our weaker selves. Dr. Voss stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. You're from this dimension's version of Mars Colony 6. The mirror Voss laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Mars Colony 6 exists, but under much more efficient leadership. When we realized that the monolith could bring us improved versions of ourselves, we made certain preparations. What kind of preparations? Morrison asked, though his grip on his weapon suggested he suspected the answer. The kind that ensure our originals never return to interfere with our improved reality. The mirror Morrison replied, producing a weapon that was identical to his counterparts, but somehow more menacing in his hands. The mirror Patel spoke for the first time, his voice clinical and detached. The quantum mechanics are quite elegant. Actually, the monolith creates a permanent link between dimensional variants, but only one version can exist in each reality. When you crossed over, you created a paradox that must be resolved. Resolve how? Riker asked, though she was already calculating defensive positions and escape routes. By ensuring that only one version of our team exists, the mirror, Riker replied. And since we're already established in this reality, that means you need to be eliminated. Riker's mind raced through their options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and stranded in an alien dimension with no way home and hostile versions of themselves who apparently had no moral constraints about committing murder. Their only advantage was that they knew how their evil counterparts thought, because they thought the same way, just with different ethical frameworks. Dr. Voss, she said quietly, activating a private comm channel. How long would you need to study the monolith and determine how to activate it? At least several hours, possibly longer. And I would need uninterrupted access to run tests and collect data. That's time we don't have, Morrison observed grimly. The mirror versions of themselves were advancing slowly, clearly enjoying the psychological pressure they were creating. The mirror, Riker called out again. You can make this easy or difficult. Surrender now, and we'll make your deaths quick and painless. Resist, and we'll ensure you suffer appropriately for the inconvenience you've caused us. Riker made a decision that drew on 2 decades of survival experience on Mars. When I give the signal, we scatter. Morrison, you and Dr. Patel head for that ridge to the east. Dr. Voss, you're with me. We're going to the monolith. Commander, Voss protested. Approaching the monolith while it's active could be extremely dangerous. More dangerous than being killed by our evil twins. Riker replied. Sometimes the most dangerous option is the only viable one. The mirror Morrison was raising his weapon when Riker shouted now and dove toward a nearby boulder. The team scattered as energy pulses from advanced weapons began to scar the Martian landscape around them. As she ran toward the monolith, Dr. Voss close behind her, Riker realized that their survival now depended on understanding alien technology they had never encountered, while being hunted by opponents who knew their every tactical preference and psychological weakness. The game of survival had begun, and the stakes were not just their lives, but the fate of 2 entire realities. The mirror-bright surface of the monolith reflected the chaos unfolding around it as energy weapons fire streaked across the Martian landscape. Commander Riker and Dr. Voss pressed themselves against the structure's base, using its bulk as cover while the mirror versions of their team pursued them with methodical precision. Dr. Voss, Riker said urgently, her voice barely audible above the sound of weapons fire. Whatever you're going to do it quickly. Voss activated her portable sensor array and began running scans of the monolith surface. The material is definitely artificial, but it's unlike anything I've ever encountered. It seems to exist in a state of quantum flux, simultaneously solid and incorporeal. From their position behind the monolith, they could hear the mirror Morrison directing his team with tactical efficiency that was both familiar and terrifying. Patel, circle around to the north side. Voss, establish a firing position on that ridge. Commander, you're with me. We'll approach from the south and drive them into a crossfire. They know exactly how we think, Riker observed grimly. Every strategy we might use, they'll anticipate. Then we need to do something they wouldn't do, Voss replied, her fingers dancing across her instrument controls. Something that violates our normal tactical protocols. Through her comm system, Riker could hear Morrison and Dr. Patel calling from their position behind the eastern ridge. Commander, we're pinned down. They've got superior positioning, and we're running low on power cells. Riker studied the monolith's reflective surface and noticed something crucial. While their own reflections moved normally, sometimes she caught glimpses of other scenes, brief flashes that showed different locations, different versions of Mars, different possibilities. Dr. Voss, the reflections in the monolith, are those other dimensions? Voss looked up from her instruments, following Riker's gaze. Possibly. If this device functions as a multidimensional portal, the surface might show glimpses of alternate realities. She paused, studying her readings more carefully. Commander, I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations within the structure. I think it's preparing to activate again. Can you control the activation? I don't know, but Voss was interrupted as an energy pulse struck the ground just meters from their position, showering them with superheated Martian soil. I'm detecting specific resonance frequencies that seem to trigger responses from the device. If I can modulate our suit transmitters to match those frequencies. Do it. Voss began rapidly recalibrating their communication equipment, while Riker monitored their tactical situation. The mirror versions of their team were approaching systematically, using textbook suppression fire and movement techniques that she had taught Morrison herself during his first year on Mars. Almost have it, Voss muttered, sweat beading on her forehead despite her suit's climate control. The frequency pattern is incredibly complex, but there's definitely a mathematical relationship. It's like a lock that requires a multidimensional key. The mirror Riker's voice echoed across the landscape, artificially amplified by her suit's speakers. This is pointless resistance. We know every move you're going to make before you make it. Surrender now, and we'll make this quick. Riker activated her comm system and replied, if you know every move we're going to make, then you know we're never going to surrender. Yes, came the chilling response. We're counting on it. Killing you will be much more satisfying than executing prisoners. Dr. Voss suddenly looked up from her instruments with excitement. Commander, I think I found something. The monolith isn't just a portal between two dimensions. It's a hub that connects multiple realities. I'm detecting at least a dozen different dimensional signatures. Can you use that? Maybe. If I can trigger a mass activation event, it might create enough dimensional instability to... Her words were cut off as the Mirror Patel appeared around the northern edge of the monolith, his weapon trained directly on them. But instead of the cold calculation they expected, his expression showed confusion and alarm. That's not possible, he said, staring at his scanner readings. There are 4 of us here, but I'm detecting biological signatures for 12 individuals. Dr. Voss's eyes widened with understanding. The other dimensions, they're bleeding through. The monolith is becoming unstable. Before the Mirror Patel could respond, the reflective surface of the monolith began to ripple like water, and figures began to emerge from its depths. Another version of Commander Riker stepped through, but this one wore a uniform that was subtly different, bearing insignia that none of them recognized. Behind her came another Dr. Voss, this one older and bearing scars across her face, followed by versions of Morrison and Patel that were clearly from yet another reality. Multiple dimensional convergence, the scarred Dr. Voss announced, her voice carrying an authority that commanded attention. The monolith network is destabilizing. All connected realities are beginning to merge. The Mirror Patel stumbled backward, his weapon wavering between targets as more figures began emerging from the monolith. This isn't what was supposed to happen, he said, his voice losing its clinical detachment and taking on a note of panic. Riker seized the opportunity. Morrison, Patel, advance on our position. The cavalry has arrived. As her team moved from their defensive positions, she found herself facing multiple versions of herself, each representing different choices, different possibilities, different outcomes. Some appear to be military commanders from realities where Mars had been militarized. Others showed the wear and wisdom of scientists who had spent their lives studying phenomena beyond human understanding. The scarred Dr. Voss approached with scientific equipment that was clearly more advanced than anything from their reality. The dimensional barriers are collapsing, she explained rapidly. The monolith network was designed to maintain separation between realities, but something has gone wrong. If we don't stabilize the system immediately, all connected dimensions will merge permanently. What does that mean for us? Morrison asked as he reached their position, his weapon trained on the increasingly confused mirror versions of their team. It means, said another Riker, this one wearing the uniform of a ship's captain, that instead of dealing with evil versions of ourselves, we'll be dealing with dozens of different versions, all existing in the same space simultaneously. Reality itself will become unstable. The Mirror Morrison had apparently reached his limit for confusion and uncertainty. I don't care how many of you there are, he shouted, raising his weapon. You're all getting eliminated. But before he could fire, yet another figure emerged from the monolith. A version of Dr. Patel who moved with the confidence of someone who had encountered this situation before. The mirror versions are quantum echoes generated by the monolith's security protocols, he announced. They're not real people. They're defensive constructs designed to prevent dimensional contamination. They seem real enough, Morrison observed grimly. Real enough to kill us, the original Dr. Patel added. The newcomer Patel nodded. Real enough to be dangerous, yes. But they're also tied directly to the monolith's power systems. If we can shut down the network, they'll cease to exist. Dr. Voss looked up from her instruments. How do we shut down something we don't understand? Very carefully, replied the scarred Dr. Voss. And with the help of people who've been studying these devices for longer than you've been alive. As more versions of themselves continued to emerge from the monolith, Riker realized that what had begun as a simple reconnaissance mission had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. They were no longer just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the stability of reality itself. But surrounded by alternate versions of her team, each bringing unique knowledge and experience from their own realities, she began to feel something she hadn't experienced since the crisis began: hope. The mirror versions of their team were now clearly outnumbered and outmatched, but they showed no signs of retreating. Instead, they were regrouping with a tactical precision that suggested they had contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Commander, the scarred Dr. Voss said urgently, we need to reach the monolith's control systems immediately. The dimensional merger is accelerating, and we have minutes, maybe less, before the damage becomes irreversible. Riker looked around at the chaotic scene of multiple realities converging in one location and made the kind of command decision that had kept her alive on Mars for 20 years. All versions, all realities, we work together or we all cease to exist. Target: the monolith's core systems. Mission: stabilize the dimensional barriers and get everyone back to their proper realities. And the mirror versions? Morrison asked, gesturing toward their hostile counterparts who were clearly preparing for a final assault. We deal with them the same way we deal with any other hazard on Mars, Riker replied grimly. We survive them.